So we have an important lecture. So before we start, Rabbi David Pincus suggested that everybody meets at the pub this evening. So if anybody wants to go to the pub, speak to David on the way up. Very important. This is where all the ideas will be debated and discussed. So it's really a very special honor that I'm able to introduce David Harris to you. He's the Vice Executive Chair of ISGAP. He served, as you know, as the Director of the American Jewish Committee for many years and was really, the ambassador, if you will, for the Jewish people for decades and continues to do so. And it's a privilege to be able to work with David at ISGAP. And since joining ISGAP, David has really contributed immensely to our standing and our impact as an organization and our impact in the work that we do. So really, David elevated the work, so it's really amazing to be able to work with him. It's a privilege for our team. And Dr. Harris, the floor is yours. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Charles, for creating and visioning ISGAP. As I said to Group B, you were a prophet, like all prophets, ahead of your time and mistrusted by too many. But your moment has come. ISGAP's moment has come. In October 2023, I received unexpectedly a phone call. The person identified herself as Nancy Toff, the executive editor, she said, of Oxford University Press. And she said, I believe what the world needs is a book on anti-Semitism accessible to a very wide audience. And this is my addition, with all due respect to the scholars, something that is written with a much wider audience in mind. She referred to it as the average New York Times reader. I chose to take the call as a compliment and not as a challenge. And I was honored. I accepted. And nearly 2 years later, this is the result. It's now in production. And I I promise to read only half of it here today, which may have to postpone the pub, Rabbi. I apologize for that. But I say that not just because I hope you'll take a look at the book, and for those of you in the classroom, perhaps agree that this is the kind of book that's intended for intelligent high school students, university students, not to mention others. But I mentioned the book because I thought I knew something about the subject. Obviously, OUP felt the same way. I knew something about the subject, I thought, because, as some of you know, I come from a family not of PhDs in history, but of PhDs in lived history. My mother was born in Moscow. She and her family, having emerged from the Pale of Settlement that Tsarist imposed ghettoization of the Jews for centuries, hoped vainly that the arrival of the Bolsheviks might lead to the fulfillment of the vision of the brotherhood of nationalities and the other promises made by Lenin and company. But it didn't take long for them to realize that they may not have been Tsars, but they carried the gene pool of Tsarist anti-Semitism. So they became refugees, among the lucky ones able to escape as late as 1929 under Stalin, and landed in Paris like many both Jews and non-Jews who fled Bolshevik Russia. and started a second life and had hope. Notwithstanding the Dreyfus trial a couple of decades before, France still offered a vision of an egalitarian society. And that was destroyed by June 1940, when Nazi Germany occupied and defeated the much vaunted French army, the much touted Maginot Line that was meant to defend France against German invasion. And like many French Jews and non-Jews, they headed south. In my family's case, spending 17 months in hiding, fleeing the Nazis, knocking on the door of every Western diplomatic legation in Marseille and elsewhere in the South, in vain seeking visas, until eventually, a longer story, they were able to cross the Pyrenees and reach the Lisbon that was at the center of the movie Casablanca. Everyone wanted to get to Lisbon, and from Lisbon to cross the ocean and leave Europe behind. So my mother never finished high school, thanks to the Nazis, thanks to the French Vichy collaborators. But she had for me a PhD in lived history, and especially in fascist anti-Semitism, in left-wing anti-Semitism, and in collaboration, i.e. the Vichy. My father was born in Budapest, Hungary, part of the German-speaking Jewish community. In 1933, at the age of 13, he landed in Vienna. He was a bit of a wunderkind. His religion was science. I know he was a wunderkind because many years after the war, the University of Vienna invited him back to receive an honorary doctorate for his work on the synthesis of the heavy hydrogen atom between the ages, as the diploma said, of 16 and 18 years old. In other words, he might have become a Nobel Prize winner in physics for his adopted homeland, Austria, but for the fact that his Jewish identity, thin as it was more important than his work in the synthesis of the heavy hydrogen atom. My father's story is a long one. He landed in the United States only after the Second World War. But he too, who could never finish his education, had a PhD in lived history. And the third person in my life closest to me, my wife, who's sitting here in the front row, will share her story on Wednesday, so I won't preempt it, but to say that it's another powerful, compelling, and in her case, little-known story of anti-Semitism in, if you will, the third important space: the far left, the far right, and jihadist anti-Semitism. The rest will wait until Wednesday. So I thought I knew something. And then, after all, I spent nearly 50 years in the organized Jewish world fighting anti-Semitism, fighting all forms of hate, building coalitions across ethnic, racial, and religious lines, marching with our partners, friends, and allies in causes important to them, important to the nation, important to all people of goodwill. I thought I learned something in those 50 years. I read lots of books, listened to lots of lectures. I can keep going. All of which is to say that when I began to work on this book, I realized how little I still knew. And again, without reading the book to you, I came to understand several things. Number one, I came to understand that the durability, if you will, the ingenuity, the creativity, the adaptability of anti-Semitism is far more powerful than many might have chosen to believe. I came to understand as well that there's no logic to anti-Semitism. As Jonathan Swift, the author of Gulliver's Travels, said some, 300-400 years ago, you cannot reason a person out of their views if they have not reasoned themselves into their views. And to me, that fit anti-Semitism perfectly. At one and the same time, to the anti-Semite, we, are both Karl Marx and the Rothschild family. We're both white and non-white. We're both the consummate, intriguing insider and unassimilable outsider. It's a set of contradictions which in no way upset the anti-Semite. Again, because they're not driven by logic in the first place. I came to understand even more than before that I, as a Jew, cannot solve the problem of the non-Jewish anti-Semite. I can point it out, I can discuss it, I can theorize about it, but at the end of the day, it's not for me to solve. When the College of Cardinals of the Catholic Church convened in the mid-1960s, and in 1965 adopt Nostra Aetate, the groundbreaking revolutionary notion that the deicide charge should be ended and a new era ushered in relations between Jews and Catholics, it was something that we encouraged, it was something we prayed for, but it was not something we achieved. So too in the Lutheran Church, with its legacy left by Martin Luther, after he initially thought the Jews could be his friends, given the shared antipathy for Catholicism, only to discover, of course, that while we shared the antipathy, we were not ready to embrace his theses, upon which he turned on us. We could not solve that, nor can we solve the challenges of Islamism/jihadism, and like the previous speakers, I make a distinction between Islam as a religion and those within it who abuse it, choose to interpret it or misinterpret it in ways that are antithetical to Jews, if not life-threatening to Jews. We cannot solve the problem. We tried every form of behavior adaptation in the belief that we could help solve the problem. We tried assimilation. We tried changing our names. We tried creating a reform religious movement whose edifices resemble churches. We introduced the organ. We did everything that we could think of in order to try and demonstrate the good Jew. We thought, since we're accused of being clannish, that by engaging with the larger society, by not just focusing on Jewish volunteer work, philanthropy, that we could contribute such that people would see us as Americans, French, Italians, South Africans, Brazilians, you name it, of a different faith, but on the same journey. And we discovered time and again, Alfred Dreyfus coming to mind as a perfect example, that that too was not so simple. So when asked by the editors, before you go any further, David, in the manuscript, they posed the question to me, what is anti-Semitism in plain speech? not for the hallowed halls of Oxford, not with multisyllabic conceptualizations and constructions in which scholars impress one another. And here's what I wrote, and forgive me for quoting myself, it's usually a Washington, D.C. habit. I live in New York, but I couldn't express it any differently if I did it extemporaneously. Above all, anti-Semitism is an enduring and infinitely adaptable conspiracy theory. It ascribes to Jews as a group malevolent characteristics and aims. Even if historical circumstances should change over time, those essential characteristics and aims do not. Thus, for hardcore anti-Semites who seek off-the-shelf answers for the world's calamities, the Jews offer a convenient one-size-fits-all answer. Jews are evil incarnate. They are the devil incarnate. They are Satan incarnate. They are the Antichrist. According to this worldview, or more precisely, demonology, the Jews are always plotting, scheming, deceiving, cheating, undermining, sabotaging, or manipulating. They are at any moment conspiring with Masons, Bolsheviks, globalists, cosmopolitans, black people, even Nazis, to undermine the established order and gain power. They are clownnishly out for themselves at the expense of others, seeking political and economic control, starting wars for their own benefit, spreading diseases to the non-Jewish population, pursuing other nefarious aims to weaken and dominate society at large. How else then to explain their ability to achieve disproportionate influence in key sectors of society, be it in pre-war Germany or contemporary America? To those who malevolently seek explanation, justification, or distraction, such trigger words as Jew, Yid, Hebrew, or in the modern era, Zionist or Israeli, can offer an irresistible temptation, with the foreknowledge that there's likely to be a ready-made audience that picks up the charge and runs with it. After all, how many people have been conditioned to believe any and all accusations against the Jewish people, and since 1948, the Jewish state? And to match the wicked intentions, Jews must be depicted accordingly, caricatured, demonized, vulgarized. They need to be portrayed as short, hunched, ghoulish, gnarled, hook-nosed, beady-eyed, secretive, avaricious, sinister, mysterious, animalistic, donkey-eared, spidery, rat-like, blubbery, or otherwise physically repulsive and subhuman. Because of the Jews' alleged perfidy, they merit no understanding, much less sympathy. Whatever tragedies befell them are fully deserved. After all, should there be any other fate for unadulterated wickedness? And if after the Holocaust anti-Semitism got a bad name among those who thought the gas chambers and crematoria were just a step too far, then the rebirth of Israel offered a new outlet. According to this view, the evil is shifted from the individual Jew to the Jewish nation, together with a projection of every imaginable sin, from genocide to ethnic cleansing, war crimes to child murder. Yet at the same time, proponents insist that such accusations are anti-Israel, not anti-Semitic, even as they are transparently transferable tropes from long-held anti-Semitic beliefs and have no relation to the truth. At heart, then, anti-Semitism is an irrational, intractable set of views about an entire group of people. Facts alone are unlikely to cure the disease. And then I quote Jonathan Swift. In previous ISGAP seminars, I've spoken in this context about what I believe to be the failure of imagination of too many in the world to grasp this, to grasp its applicability to today. And those of you in Group B heard me earlier this morning talk about the fact that we must never lose sight in any of our discussions here at Oxford in these 2 weeks about the relevance of what we say and do to today's challenge. This isn't simply a luxury academic discussion and debate about things in the past, though it should be, in part. But for those of us like myself, increasingly alarmed, and I use that word advisedly, alarmed about what's happening, we have to focus on the present as well. We have to focus both on understanding the present, how we got here, and we have to understand, even more importantly, when we leave Oxford, what happens next. And part of that, of course, is baked into the program that Charles and his team have developed. But once you leave Oxford, in a sense, you're on your own. We count on your pledge, but for those of us who fear that what's happening now is something that is not just transient or temporary, some would like to believe that when the war in Gaza ends, we'll go back to a status quo ante of some sorts, I think fail to grasp the lessons that at least people like myself, and I believe you, Charles, have taken from the last 2 years in particular. So I ask myself, and I think we are obligated to try and find the answers. Charles posed it in one way in his Group A and Group B discussions. I'll pose it in a different way. I want to understand why, when our youngest son entered Cornell University in the fall of 2004, I think, he would call us regularly, and I'd ask him about the situation on campus. And he would say for the 4 years he was at Cornell Arts and Sciences, "Dad, nothing to worry about. This place is a safe space for Jews, for Friends of Israel, for all of us. Worry about other places." Then along comes an ISGAP colleague of ours named Misha Galperin, whose son enters Cornell a year and a half ago, and like our son Josh, was a proud Jew and a friend of Israel. And he practically had to put on body armor in order to be both during his time in Cornell. What happened in those 20 years? Let me frame it a different way. Until perhaps a decade ago, my alma mater, one I'm ashamed of, the University of Pennsylvania, because the president at the time, Liz McGill, was one of the 3 who appeared before the US Congress, alongside the presidents of Harvard and MIT, and I don't think I have to finish the thought. But until about a decade ago, by the admission of the deans at Penn with whom I spoke, the university was about 1/3 Jewish. Their number. Today, by their admission, it's 12 to 13%. Did Jews become dumber in the last 2 decades? By a friend of ours, Charles Shabbos Kestenbaum, who's been very active as a former student at Harvard, the incoming class of Harvard was 4% Jewish. Not long ago, it was about 20% Jewish. What happened? And I'd like to know why in the year 2000, when George W. Bush asked Dick Cheney to be his running mate for the upcoming election, and the presumed Democrat was Vice President Al Gore, and the Democratic polling suggested that it would be a tough race, and they needed a good choice as vice president. They went to a Shabbat-observing Jew who would refuse on the campaign trail to eat a ham and cheese sandwich if offered. whose wife's name was not Muffy or Puffy, but Hadassah. And the Democratic bigwigs at the time said, this is the magic formula. This is how we beat Bush and Cheney in the year 2000. And you know what? They were right. In the popular vote, the ticket won. As you may recall, it came down to a phrase I had never heard before, hanging chads, which then led to a Supreme Court decision, a 5-4 decision. Otherwise, Joe Lieberman would have been the Vice President of the United States. Why do I mention this? Because that was just 24, 25 years ago. Fast forward to 2024. We're told that there are 7 battleground states. 7. No one mentioned an 8th or a 9th. And according to the so-called experts, there was one potential game changer as vice president on the Democratic ticket. And his name was Governor Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania, one of the 7 battleground states. Ben, you know the story, I'm sure, better than most in this room. Now, I don't know anything about the personal chemistry between Kamala Harris and Josh Shapiro, but I do know this. She picked someone who was not from the 7 battleground states, who did not help her win any of the 7 battleground states, not a one. It still puzzles me what might have been added to the ticket. In theory, I get it. In practice, I don't. And I do know that Josh Shapiro would at least have delivered Pennsylvania, maybe a couple of others, and who knows if we would have had a President Kamala Harris, which would have been history-making in some important ways. What happened in those 24 years? And unless we can get to the answers to these questions, it seems to me that it's like being told we have skin cancer, if you allow me a medical analogy, and going out to the pharmacy to buy first aid cream because we really can't face the reality of what we have and may have to go through. So let's put on our first aid cream and maybe a Band-Aid and just hope it goes away. And I'm afraid that too many of our elected officials and too many of our Jewish organizational leaders both have been putting first aid cream on the skin cancer. And so unless we delve deep, and this is why I joined ISGAP 2 years ago, because I understood after October 7th, this was no longer about just friendships or sentimentality or tradition. This was about life and death for the Jewish people. And I would argue, as Charles has argued, and we would only be the first floor of the building of liberal democracy to collapse. The rest would follow. But ISGAP was digging deeper. The ISGAP was a kind of organizational oncologist. And ISGAP said, we can't understand these kinds of changes, so deep, so systemic, so structural, unless and until we find better answers than maybe we didn't do enough interfaith Passover Seders this year. Or, gee, we forgot to host an iftar dinner, and maybe that explains why things have gone off the tracks. So ISGAP, as you know, first raised the alarm about the universities, about the Saidization, drawing from Edward Said's name, and how smartly he planned for the generations to follow him. He was not a one-man show, and he planned and planted over 2 generations of scholars, his mentors, his acolytes. We came to understand through ISGAP foreign funding. And I'm not talking about funding from Canada or Japan. I'm talking about funding that came with very different strings attached. And we learned about the century-long plan discovered by Swiss and American intelligence and law enforcement services, and began to understand that there was something called the Muslim Brotherhood, and it wasn't a variation of a Greek fraternity or sorority, nor was it a Muslim equivalent of B'nai B'rith. It was something different. We also came to understand, though people don't want to discuss it, that we can't talk about the changes of the last 20 or 25 years, whether in the US or Canada or in Europe, without talking about migration. We don't want to touch it because, with the exception of the slaves that were brought to America involuntarily, others came to America not just voluntarily, but eagerly. And how can we, the beneficiaries of American immigration, in any way raise questions about others seeking to come? But then along comes, improbably, perhaps of all countries, Germany, recently, and says, you know what? We have certain core values. One of them is our belief, as a matter in German of Staatsräson, national interest, that Israel has a right to exist. And therefore, we are going to start asking prospective citizens, do you share that belief? You don't have to share the belief that Israel is ruled by this or that party or leader, but this is a core tenet for us. And they developed a set of questions. If you don't believe the Holocaust happened, if you don't believe Israel has the right to exist, perhaps if you don't believe liberal democracy is a better way of governing than illiberal democracy, much less tyranny, maybe Germany is not the best place for you. After all, as my parents learned, as my wife learned, migration is a privilege, not a right. It's a privilege. So we have to talk about migration. It's tricky, I get it. On the other hand, to pretend that it's not part of the conversation, when we see before our eyes the images at Columbia University, when we meet Khalil Mahmoud, the student who was to be deported or not to be deported, can we simply pretend? We need to ask other difficult questions. And too many are unwilling or afraid to ask those questions because they're afraid of offending interfaith partners or other partners. And I believe there's a way to do this that both asks the right questions and at the same time preserves the partnerships and the alliances and the friendships that we need to preserve. Even as we learned after October 7th, not all of them are worth preserving. And there are new friendships and alliances and partnerships that we need to explore and fast. So with that in mind, I come back to my biggest concern perhaps as a lifelong student of the 1930s. I want to know how in the most industrialized, civilized, cultured, educated country, some would say, Germany, the Holocaust could happen. And perhaps between 60 and 80 million people in total died, countries overrun, cities destroyed. You know the list. I don't need to enumerate. How could it happen? And what did the countries and institutions around Germany, especially the ones that we thought we trusted, how did they react? And could the war have been prevented? Could the Holocaust have been averted? So while we do lots of studies about the 1940s and the Battle of Kursk and the Battle of Stalingrad and the invasion of Italy from the south and D-Day, I think we need to do a lot more study of the 1930s. And I say that not as an academic exercise. I say that because I believe that there are timeless lessons in that period which are screaming to be heard today. And if we choose to ignore them, woe be upon us. The New York Times, in December 1924, published a small news article entitled, "Hitler Tamed by Prison." The newspaper of record said it is believed Hitler will retire to private life and return to Austria, the country of his birth. Well, they didn't quite get that one right. Among academic luminaries, few were more famous, Charles, than Harold Lasky, a Jew here at the London School of Economics, or when I was a student there, the London School of Economics, no longer. Here's what he said in 1932. It's not unlikely that Hitler will end his career as an old man in some Bavarian village who in the beer garden in the evening tells his intimates how he nearly overturned the Second German Reich. It is comforting to live on the memory of an illusion. The newspaper of record, a distinguished scholar at the London School of Economics. How about Franz von Papen, who together with Hindenburg believed that they could maneuver Hitler into the position of chancellor and yet still control him. No danger at all, said von Papen on January 30th, 1933, the day they made him chancellor. We've hired him for our act. Within 2 months, we will have pushed Hitler so far in the corner that he'll squeak. What happened 2 months later? March 1933, thank you, the enabling legislation, in which the Bundestag gave Hitler complete power to bypass the Bundestag. How about the Oxford Union of this university, which adopted by a vote of 275 to 153 that this house will under no circumstances fight for its king and country? How was that message received by Adolf Hitler in Berlin? If the creme de la creme of the youth of Britain said they were not prepared to fight, and the students at Manchester and Glasgow followed in a similar vote, this could be a piece of cake. Not to be outdone, Cordell Hull, the American Secretary of State, in April 1933, 2 weeks after the enabling legislation, said, and I quote, "Mistreatment of Jews in Germany may be considered virtually eliminated." Or how about Walter Lippmann, considered by many the greatest journalist of his era, a Jew, an assimilated Jew, a Jew who wrote in his syndicated column that Hitler represents, quote, "an authentic voice of a genuinely civilized people." He argued that the Jews were serving as, quote, "a kind of lightning rod which protects Europe," because oppression of German Jews was, quote, "satisfying the lust of the Nazis, who feel they must conquer somebody." A Jew prepared to sacrifice the Jews for the lust of Nazi Germany to satisfy that need. What am I saying here? And I've got lots more. I'm saying that the best academics from the best institutions of learning, the most distinguished journalists and media outlets, top politicians, and to this list I can add for you 3 consecutive British prime ministers, MacDonald, Baldwin, and Chamberlain. I can throw in the former Prime Minister David Lloyd George, who in a visit to Berlin in 1936 called Hitler, I quote, the George Washington of his people. I can talk about your Prime Minister, Mackenzie King, and his travel to Berlin, and his laudatory remarks about Hitler. I can keep going. I'm saying this to put pressure on you, to shift the responsibility onto your shoulders as well if you aren't already shouldering the responsibility. These were not unimpressive or uncredentialed people. This was the elite of America, Canada, Britain, France, the great Western powers at the time, and the countries that, had they wished to, perhaps could have stopped Hitler. In fact, as some of you may know, Churchill reported on a conversation that he had with President Roosevelt, in which Roosevelt said to the British leader, "I'm looking for a name for this war." And Churchill said without hesitation, "Call it the unnecessary war." Meaning, of course, that had, and of course Churchill was in the wilderness at the time, he was not in power, but had the world stood up to Germany at, pick your moment, the Rhineland, remilitarization, conscription, ignoring the Kellogg-Briand Pact to End War, ignoring the Washington Naval Conference and limitations on battleships, Abyssinia/Ethiopia, the Anschluss, Austria. At various moments in time, could Hitler have been stopped had our leading institutions and leaders chosen to see things differently? Had America not adopted one neutrality law after another? Had the President of the United States, who in so many ways was such a valiant, visionary leader, nonetheless been frightened by the isolationist wing, the anti-Semitism in the United States, the unwillingness to get involved in another European war? We can only ask the question. But even more importantly, and my message here is, we can only learn from the history, because there are signs. I don't want to say, because that's a distracting conversation, are we reliving the 1930s? I don't really know the answer. In part, perhaps, certainly not identically. Most importantly, I believe, because the State of Israel exists. And in the 1930s, when my parents and other Jews were trapped, when Hitler said to the world, "You issue statements about the Nuremberg laws, about Kristallnacht, you care so much, bitte, bitte, take them, take them." And what was the Western reaction? It was the Evian Conference of 1938, 32 nations that got together to discuss the refugee problem, and only one, perhaps with some profit in mind, chose to accept some Jews, and that was the Dominican Republic. How many of us from America know that in the entire decade of the 1930s, in our immigration quota system, the quota for Germany was only filled once? And that was not for lack of applicants. Jews and German non-Jews who wanted to flee Hitler alike. Only once, which showed you the resistance to accepting any Jews in those days, even as the evidence mounted, and even while Hitler said, "Take them." So Hitler got his messages. He got his messages from world leaders. He got his messages from the Oxford Union. He got his messages from American immigration policy, and Canadian immigration policy, Charles, was no better. Maybe in some respects even harsher. And now we look at reemerging, rapidly escalating anti-Semitism, and I believe we're obligated to ask these tough questions, which I had prayed I would never again in my life ask. And I do so very personally, very selfishly perhaps. My wife and I bribed, begged, blackmailed our children to have children. We want to be grandparents. We want to be Jewish grandparents. We want my mother, my father, my wife's father, all of whom were victims of fascism. We want them to know that ultimately we won at huge cost, but we won with new generations of young Jews proud of liberal democracy and proud of their Jewish identity. And I have to say, with broken heart before you, I'm not sure what the future holds for our grandchildren as Jews. Too much evidence is piled up in too many places, too much conflation of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, of course, and too much rationalization by too many otherwise leading institutions. From the university presidents who spoke about genocide in terms of context, Harvard, MIT, and Penn, to the most recent incident in Vienna, where in a restaurant, the waiter apparently asked 3 people, "What language are you speaking?" And when they said Hebrew, they were kicked out. They were performing as one of the world's leading classical trios in Austria, and everything in between. Deadly anti-Semitism. In Washington, D.C., in my former employer's event, the HAC, 2 people killed. Boulder, Colorado. Paul Kessler killed in Los Angeles, protesting peacefully for Israel. Zionists told to get off the subway in New York City. Jewish students barricaded inside a library at Cooper Union College because they were Jews. Teachers in the New York City public school system barricaded in their offices because students saw something posted on Facebook that was pro-Israel. We could spend the rest of the 2 weeks discussing these events. They're enough to convince me. And so finally, if all of this is true, David, enough of the description, what about the prescription? And for the prescription, it seems to me that we have to learn, again, some basic lessons of history. I'll just offer a couple that I mentioned in the book. What happened in Denmark in 1943? It's quite a remarkable story. It's not a perfect story, but we're taught that the perfect is the enemy of the good. And in the bleakness of the Shoah, the fact that more than 90% of Danish Jews were rescued practically overnight when they got wind of the German intention to arrest and deport, to me stands as a shining example. Some people respond to me by saying, but David, that was only 6,000 Jews out of 6 million. I wish I could offer examples of 600,000 Jews. But what I came to understand in my attempt to grasp what happened in Denmark was a very simple proposition that took no academic discourse, no long-term studies, no major grants. It was a very simple, repeated response by many, which I chose to believe was the right response. 4 words. 4 words. They were fellow Danes. That was it. They were fellow Danes. They were our neighbors. They were fellow Danes. Is it really all as simple as that? Jews are fellow human beings. Jews are fellow Americans. Jews are fellow French, Brits, Italians, you go down the list. Is it really as simple as that? Or fast forward to Billings, Montana, in the early 1990s, when a brick or cinder block was thrown through the window of a Jewish child's bedroom because he had put the image of a Hanukkah, a Hanukkah menorah, in his window, as Jews are encouraged to do. Fortunately, he was not in the bedroom, so he was not hurt. But what happened next is what's instructive for us. The police chief of Billings, Montana, the editor of the major newspaper in Billings, Montana, and the head of the State Council of Churches of Montana got together and said, what should we do besides prayers and thoughts, tears, robotic statements? And they agreed that the newspaper would print in the next edition a full-page image of the menorah and invite every resident of Billings, Montana to put that image in their window. The message to the haters, whoever they were, the Ku Klux Klan, whoever they were, the Aryan Brotherhood, was, in this moment, we are all Jews. Every single one of us. You are the minority. We are the majority. Our values will defeat your values. And it worked. It worked. Those haters who threw the brick and tried to spread this Jew hatred disappeared. Now, are they elsewhere? But to me, these are case studies. The king of Morocco, when told during the Vichy regime to identify and deport the Jews, famously said, I have no Jewish subjects. I have only Moroccan subjects. The priest and the mayor on the Greek island of Zakynthos were called by the occupying Germans into the office and said, we want the names of all 275 Jews on this island by tomorrow. They came back the next day with a piece of paper with 2 names on it, their own. The Greek Orthodox mayor and the Greek Orthodox bishop submitted their own names. And in the meantime, the island managed to save the 275 Jews and hide them in the hills. I wish I had more scholarly, empirically based answers for what the Pfizer vaccine might be. I don't. I understand the role of leadership at every level, political, civic, religious, the individual, the neighbor, the friend, the colleague, all of those levels. But at the end of the day, they were fellow Danes. They were fellow Danes. And the moment that we all grasp this, and especially the other great faith traditions and the others who can shape the direction of the world, is the day that I'll be able to toss these 3x5 cards about the failure of imagination and understand that our 8 grandchildren have a bright future, as every child on this planet, every child on this planet ought to have a bright future. Thank you.
So thank you, profound, really, thank you very much. And listening to you is incredible as always. I was thinking how fortunate I am I get to listen to you regularly, so thank you.
I'm not sure my wife would agree with you.
All right, so we have about 30 minutes for Q&A.
Great.
So David, thank you.
Of course.
David, thank you so much. Now,
I'm going to take a pen just to make some notes. May I do that? you have a piece of paper? Yes, Larry.
As somebody who was as well informed before starting this project as you were, I'm just making very curious. What was your process? What did you read? What did you do to further, your own exposure to this material? How did you even start such a project?
Should we take a few or?
Sure, as you would.
Thank you, David.
I saw you would.
No.
Your
Ben.
analogy of being the oncologist is certainly a cancer that needs to be arrested. Most people die from cardiac arrest. They don't die from cancer. And why I'm saying this, actually, you said that ISGAP needs to be the oncologist, so it's the oncologist. And that's correct, I agree. But to me, the future is for ISGAP to be the cardiologist. What keeps the heart alive? Humanity has a heart problem, where hate is taking the place of love. I know I'm a preacher, I'm not gonna start preaching about agape love. But I do want to raise the question. We know why people hate Jews, but we don't know why people don't love Jews. Our terminology, how we see. I want your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, to have a great opportunity as my grandchildren. I'm a great-grandfather. Got married at a very early age. I'm going to end on this point with a question. When will your book be out? And state the title of the book again. Lastly,
Was that a planted question by me? Thank you, Ben.
I'm not saying that the book is much needed like yesterday. David, your lived experience and the lived experience of your parents, how do we connect all of our lived experiences as human beings and mount a great offensive, and I hate to use the word offensive, but I think sometimes we're too much on the defensive. I think we react to the tragedies. I want to prevent the tragedies from happening. And it seems to me your scholarship, the book that you're writing, I hope in the appendix or somewhere, it's a list of things that people need to do to help shape a better future. I agree, we are kind of ahistorical, we don't learn enough from the past, in the 1930s. Most of us don't know enough about what really happened so that somebody like Hitler could even rise to power. So that's my comment as well as a question, but thank you.
Oh, Larry, I know it sounds trite. The book really wrote itself. They asked me to write it as a question and answer. So I got to interview myself, which gave me some control over the direction of the book. But before I could write the answers, I mean, I won't take you through the whole process, but when they called me in October, I was so surprised that I simply thought, okay, now I go home and start writing the book. But there was a 6-month approval process before I even got to write the book, which basically went over the architecture of the book. And that was the editors themselves, followed by the board of Oxford University Press, followed by outside experts whose names I never knew, all of whom had to approve every step of the way. I will say this. I hope the OUP offices don't hear me.
Not far.
I know, I'll whisper it. You know, they could have asked people with a very different approach to these issues. There's certainly enough of them at your home, Columbia University, or across the country to Stanford and Berkeley, who could have written this book, and frankly, it would have looked very different. So I'm grateful that they asked me, and I'm grateful that whatever else is going on here, they approved the text, which comes from the same person you just heard speak. So you will not see the waffling, equivocation, rationalization that sometimes comes, as you saw with Walter Lippmann, for example. You know, when a Jew is asked to write, they succumb to a kind of Jewish Stockholm syndrome. And you, as a psychiatrist, would probably know that phenomenon better than most in this room. Ben, boy, I couldn't agree with you more about picking up on the cardiologist. As you said, when love replaces hate. I mean, we've been striving for that, Ben, as you know. I mean, if you allow me, at the core of every religion is the golden rule. You know, what we eat, what we drink, when we fast, when we don't fast, when we worship, when we don't worship, are all accessories, in my judgment. They're accessories to this fundamental notion of, can we achieve a world in which we're all fellow Danes or fellow Americans, pick. That to me is what this exercise is all about. And if some say, to achieve that, please don't eat pork, okay. But I don't believe that by not eating pork alone, I'm going to get any closer to a place of love. So I think you're absolutely right. And if I may say so, because we Jews also need to remind the world of the positive messages in our tradition. Charles, you did that in your lecture earlier today. To me, the central revolutionary message in Judaism is contained in the Hebrew words B'Tselem Elohim. B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God. To me, it's a mind-bogglingly game-changing, history-changing notion that says we are all created in the image of God. I mean, think about that for a moment, which is precisely why if you visit any synagogue anywhere in the world, you will never see a rendering or an image of God. How could you? By definition, it's exclusionary. The notion that we are all created in the image of God, to me, is the foundation, at least aspirationally, Ben, of human equality, human justice, and human love.
But David, most seminaries, the Jewish but in most Christian seminaries, they don't teach the Imago Dei. In most Christian seminaries, I've been to a few of them.
I'm sure you have.
They don't teach the Imago Dei, the image of God. I think that there are a lot of people who live in the New Testament, but think the New Testament fell out of the sky without the Old Testament. It's incorrect theology. And so I think, I'm not trying to turn ISGAP into a school of theology, but
Whatever it takes, Ben.
But I would say that part of our interdisciplinary studies should definitely corral these divinity schools. Harvard, Yale, Princeton, all started as seminaries. Now look what they have become. And so I just want to let you know that this whole, you may need to have a chapter in your book on the image of God.
It'll have to be in the second edition.
Maybe instead of a cardiology department, we need a whole hospital.
But what was it? But Ben, I mean, we're taught, I was taught, why at the end of the day are we explaining the story of Adam and Eve? The version I've chosen to embrace in my life, Ben, is that if we follow that story, we all come from the same lineage. We cannot claim family hierarchies or lineage hierarchies. To me, it's a beautiful thought. Whether it's true or mythological, I choose to embrace it as an interpretation of the rabbis, again, to your point. Or the notion of the Sabbath, the notion of a day of rest for everyone, for slaves, for animals. These are revolutionary concepts. And I'm not here to say, therefore, the world owes the Jewish people. I'm here simply to say that, ironically, for the social justice warriors in particular, who have been targeting the Jews, so much of what they are writing on came from, guess who? The book is available for pre-order on Amazon today, in the last few weeks. It's entitled Antisemitism, What Everyone Needs to Know. I can't tell you yet about the film version or who's going to play me. I think Danny DeVito probably. Charlotte. What?
Is that? Oh, hello.
Hello.
I first wanted to say this is really fantastic to hear that this book is going to be out there, and it is precisely what is needed. One of my questions was about any intentional strategic rollout amongst primary education, I guess in America, but this would be very welcome in the UK as well. It's a real void. And I wanted to link this to higher education and a personal experience with Rabbi Wittenberg, who I had for a talk a few years ago at the University of Exeter, the Arab and Islamic Studies Centre. And he walked into the entrance hall and he looked at the shelf with all the books on it, and it was 90% Ian Pape and Noam Chomsky on Palestine, etc., etc. And he made an official complaint to say that there was no balance and there were no other authors of any other perspective here. Now that was a few years ago now, and I've spent a lot of time in this institute alongside Ian Pape, and I have my PhD from there. And I've watched how this very early complaint by Rabbi Wittenberg is really poignant actually to a crisis at Exeter and across universities in which there is nothing like this. There are whole Middle East institutes that not a problem in itself, but there are no Jewish studies institutes. There's not even a module on Jewish studies, and there is zero balance in the texts. And I feel that the universities themselves have primed the population to become anti-Semitic and to see anti-Semitism as something that's virtuous, simply because there's been no other entry into the discussion, like nothing like this.
Charlotte, I can only say that I need your help. I mean, this book will, and I know, forgive me, it sounds self-promotional. It's not me to be self-promotional, but if this book is going to make it into libraries, classrooms, universities more generally, Charlotte, it's going to be real people making real decisions to include the book in their curriculum. If there's pushback, to stand firm, knowledgeably, confidently, because there may be pushback, although it has the imprimatur, and that's the advantage. This is not an obscure Jewish publisher or a self-published or vanity publisher. This is Oxford University Press. So I think it's, in a way, it's a gift. I've identified myself biographically in my ISGAP role. This is an ISGAP product, and all of us together can help, I think, make this available. Will Oxford University Press do it entirely on its own? They publish lots of books, Charlotte. So let's help each other.
Maybe we haven't talked about maybe another time, like have we talk about what strategically we can do?
Sure. And it's coming out in a British edition in February. So the American-Canadian edition is coming out October, November, and then the British edition in February. Can I call my wife?
You may.
Did you raise your hand? No. Oh, I'm sorry. However.
Thank you very much.
That's later.
Thank you, David, for this, as always, very inspiring talk. I just want to refer to something you said in the very beginning, because it has been said in this plenary here before. Aras Rafik said it, and we have heard it over and over again in many of the panels. The far left, the far right, and the Islamists. We keep saying that and completely forget mainstream anti-Semitism. And the fact that anti-Semitism has always emanated among the mainstream, is deeply entrenched among the mainstream. And I just looked up these headlines that were recently in the British press. Anti-Semitism that was in the Telegraph, anti-Semitism normalized in middle-class Britain. That was just like a few days ago. A few weeks, like 2 weeks before, we had like a whole concert in Britain, really like chanting, like a whole festival, death to the IDF, right? And I could keep going on and on. The BBC was mired in one after another anti-Semitism scandal. The BBC, the British Broadcasting Company, and this is not something that is exclusive to Britain, it's something that's systemic in history. I remember Charles in previous events has always like emphasized it. The universities in Germany during the Nazi times were the first one to get rid of the Jews. In Nazi Germany, the group with the highest, the professional group with the highest share of Nazi members were physicians, doctors, medical doctors, right? So we could keep going on and on, but the point is, we have events like this, and we always speak about the radical left and the radical right, and the Islamists, and all this is true, but there's also mainstream. And if we want to know why could the Holocaust happen, and why does anti-Semitism not disappear, I think we cannot afford to obliterate or like to ignore this fact that anti-Semitism always has been a mainstream phenomenon.
Thank you. It's a very important point. I think in saying it, I can't speak for others. I'm triaging. It's what people do in hospital emergency rooms. I'm triaging, and I'm asking myself, since we've now once again entered into an era of lethal anti-Semitism, not just social anti-Semitism. The old British definition of anti-Semitism is not to hate Jews more than necessary. I'm talking about lethal anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism that kills Jewish children in Toulouse, France. I'm talking about anti-Semitism that kills Holocaust survivors in Paris. I'm talking about anti-Semitism that kills volunteer guards at the synagogue in Copenhagen. I'm talking about the anti-Semitism that kills Jewish peace activists in Boulder, Colorado. I'm talking about anti-Semitism that kills Jewish shoppers at a kosher food store in Jersey City. So you're absolutely right. I'm triaging because I see a clear, present, if you will, existential threat to Jews, supported by, enabled by, as you point out, Mark, but at least that's my reasoning, but I'm grateful you added the fourth important dimension. This lady here, please.
Thank you. My question is about your work in Jewish organizational life. So I live in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh, where in 2018, of course, we had the shooting at our synagogue. And at the time, we had an outpouring of love and support. And so when you're talking about these questions that you're asking about what happened in the last 20 years, what happened in the last 24 years, in Pittsburgh, I can ask the question of what happened in the last 6, 7 years. Because when that shooting took place in 2018, the entire city poured love at the Jewish community. The Steelers changed their logo to include a Jewish star. There's an Eradicate the Hate global conference now that takes place in Pittsburgh every year. But today, Squirrel Hill, my community, is represented by Summer Lee, a rabid anti-Semite, who Jews have really supported. Jews in my community have really supported her in becoming a member of Congress and continue to protect her as a member of Congress. We have anti-Zionist Jews in our day schools teaching our children. We have confusion among our leadership and our Jewish community, and none of this is specific to Pittsburgh. Of course, it's across the United States and probably across other Jewish communities as well. But it's so clear, this 2018 to 2023 shift. And so my question is really about your experience in Jewish communal life. What I have seen is a failure among Jewish communal leadership to prevent this acceptance or this embracing of anti-Zionist, anti-Israel feelings within our community. Like, I feel like we're subsidizing our own suicide, kind of. And I wonder what we can do in that respect as well.
Well, first of all, I'm sorry, what's your name, please?
Rona.
Rona. So, thank you. Rona, first of all, every time I hear the term anti-Zionist Jews, I grimace. We Jews are famous for the 2 synagogues, 3 opinions, three opinions, 4 organizations. We all laugh about it, but at least it seems to me as one simple Jew that there are 3 non-negotiable tenets to being Jewish. They may be subject to various interpretations, but they're non-negotiable. One, we have a faith tradition. You observe the faith, you don't, you observe it in the breach. I'm not here to monitor police, but can we all agree that this is a story that has a faith component to it? We believe in one God, not multiple gods. We don't create bricks and mortar gods. Number 2, we're a people, a tribe, whatever you wish to call us. I take it a step further. There's a Hebrew expression, Kol Yisrael Aravim Ze Bazeh. All Jews are responsible one for the other. I don't see it as therefore excluding me from all human beings are responsible one for the other. Both thoughts can coexist and co-operationalize. But I share that view. We are a people. And number 3, we have a link to a land. The land is not called Poland. Breaking news. It's not called Brooklyn. Whether you accept the Torah literally, figuratively, occasionally, or even not at all, can we at least agree that the reference points in the Torah are not to Berdichev and Bialystok and Brooklyn. They are to Yerushalayim, Jerusalem, Judea, Zion, Zion. So the notion of being an anti-Zion Jew, to me, negates. So again, one may say, I think Israel should territorially negotiate on this much, this little, but the notion that you can be an anti-Zion Jew, is beyond me. So my answer, and I realize this is an audience of both Jews and Gentiles, but I'm saying this because you asked me, Rona. I think the first answer for Jews, not for Gentiles, to anti-Semitism is not more billboards on highways or 30-second ads during the Super Bowl football game. I think the first answer for Jews is more Semitism. Because today's Jewish children are going to be facing hurdles and obstacles to their Jewish identity, which our adult children never faced in America, and which I can even say, as the son of 2 Holocaust survivors, I never faced. Because, Mark, for at least a few decades in America, maybe we can call it a holiday from history. And we were the beneficiaries. My generation born right after the Second World War and my children's generation. But now that we have grandchildren, Rona, they're going to be challenged. Some have already been. In the classroom, in the schoolyard, on the street, in the quad, you name it. And they're going to have better answers for themselves on why it's worth standing up with pride and courage and dignity and self-respect than my generation had or our children's generation had. So for me, if I could wave a magic wand to the, let's say, the 80% of the Jewish community that would agree with this conversation, put aside for a moment the 20%. I want to focus on the 80%, and especially on the children, because if they're going to wear a Star of David, if they're going to put a mezuzah on their door, if they're going to speak Hebrew in public, I don't want them to have to look over their shoulder right and left or have to worry about the consequences. And more broadly about Jewish organizations, I can't speak specifically about Pittsburgh, though obviously it's a day that will live forever in my memory as well. But my message to Jewish organizations is throw out the October 6th playbook. There is an entirely new world out there, including an entirely new set of challenges that have been revealed. It's time to create an October 8th playbook. And that's going to require a lot more courage than the October 6th playbook. Because if we're not going to discuss the root causes, the structural, systemic causes that Charles and I and others have referred to, then it's going to be more fluffy, duffy, namby-pamby kinds of conversations which avoid the real issues facing us. So I'd like to see, in addition to Ben's suggestion for a cardiologist and my suggestion for an oncologist, I want a neurosurgeon to give Jews a spinal transplant. I mean it, a spinal transplant. But maybe drawn from those 18 and 19 and 20-year-old young Israelis who have put their lives on the line every single day in the most evil conditions imaginable, and yet do it proudly and willingly. We need a spinal transplant. I'm going to get into trouble if I don't. Joshua, you need a microphone. Wait, you need a microphone. Just 1 second. Sorry, I didn't know.
I wanted to add something to what David said. Is that what you're talking about is something that as a person who was not born in this country, I noticed. This country has been so incredibly...
Meaning the U.S.
Of course. So incredibly good to the Jews that they really feel Americans. Like, for example, what I see, it doesn't happen in Italy, in France, maybe even in Canada, it happens only in this country, and unfortunately, maybe what is going to happen, hopefully not, will teach Americans to be more Jewish and not more American, which is a sad reality, but this is what makes us right.
So we have, Tish and then Heidi. Okay.
The problem is not the questions, the problem is the answers.
Okay, well, you may cover it in your book. Two quick things. I wanted to know, when you noted what happened between Lieberman and Shapiro, I just wanted to know if you examined from the lens of backlash, that when Lieberman was identified as presidential, you know, that caliber, that by definition made Jews white. And there's a backlash that comes with that, and that's what happened with Obama. When he became president, then, oh, well, there's no more racism because you have a black president, and then you had George Floyd, and people were shocked by it because they thought that had been extinguished.
Right.
So that's just something I thought of when you said what happened.
Yeah, thanks for saying that, Tish. Just on a lighter note, if I may, when Lieberman was named, I remember the generation of my parents, or in younger people's cases, grandparents, was largely, oi. Now the Jews will be blamed for everything. I wish it weren't. The reaction of, call it my generation, was, this is amazing, this is America, this is an entirely new experience for Jews in the diaspora, a heartbeat away from the Oval Office. And the attitude of our children, who were then in their teens and 20s, was, what's the big deal? What's the big deal? Well, no, it's not. It's because they were normalized to an America my wife described, where this was the natural outcome. By the way, as Barack Obama's election, 8 years later, 2008, was to us history-making, groundbreaking. To our children, it was more, but Mom, Dad, this is today's America. You're still living in another era. And so I think, again, back to Mark, we really believed. I think if you ask most American Jews, sure, there was an anti-Semite here and there was, something troubling, but it was at such a low level compared to what we had experienced over 2,000 years. This was the second Jerusalem. This was the city on the hill. We had proved that diaspora exceptionalism was alive and well in the United States of America. So you ask someone like myself, are we about to have a globalized the Intifada mayor of New York City? Of New York City? The largest Jewish city in the world? The most comfortable place for Jews anywhere outside of the state of Israel? I would have said, what are you smoking? You out of your mind? And lo and behold, as of today, it's very likely this will be our next mayor, who has said, if the Israeli prime minister comes to New York, I will make every effort to have him arrested. Anyway, and was there one? But thanks, Tish.
Thank you. So, so David,
That's
thank
it?
you.
Okay.
Well, we have one more comment before I thank you. So,
Who's that? You said
Rob,
Heidi?
Rob and Heidi Silverstone
Okay.
came here, and they're
First time.
supportive
Right.
of ISGAP. I know Heidi wanted to make
Great.
a statement. So please, the floor is
Heidi.
yours, and thanks for being here.
Thank you. So today's our last day. Unfortunately, we can only stay for 2 days. So I wanted to say it was wonderful getting to know some of you at tea and breakfast. Fantastic. And I loved hearing from so many of you. We really didn't know what to expect at this institute. So if I can take something from the Passover Seder, if we only heard from scholars, that would be enough, that you knew. If we only heard from our non-Jewish allies, that would be enough, Dayenu. But what really struck me is that we heard from a lot of younger people. I mean, I'm one of the older people, I guess, I don't know. But to see people who just graduated college, somebody who's in high school, you know, I came here thinking, oh, what is going on with the world? This is a very heavy topic. But knowing that all of you are here, especially the young people in the room, it makes me leave these 2 days feeling in a much better place. So thank you to all of you, the attendees, the speakers, to ISGAP, the people who put it together for this wonderful thing. Thank you.
Thanks for taking the time to be here. We appreciate it. And I know on everybody in this room that was sort of glued to every word that you were saying. Really thanks for the inspiration and the analysis and your leadership. And it was an honor that you're here. So on behalf of everybody, thank you.
Before everybody leaves,